This film looks at Ireland from the air. It shows how water, earth, stone and time have shaped its history and formed its character. Thousands of years ago, people arrived by water. They dug the earth, built with stone, and evolved with time. Flying above the land, we can jump across the centuries. Our marks and scratches remaining on the landscape of the island. Thousands of years ago, the world was a frightening place. Ancient people believed the earth was circular and flat, surrounded by an unpredictable and treacherous ocean. They believed sea monsters lived close to the horizon where the world ended. Yet these fears did not deter ancient European explorers. In primitive boats, they pitched and rolled across the deep and hostile Atlantic. Finally, exhausted, they sighted land. Our distant ancestors cautiously probed the coast of this nameless island. They explored the estuaries and rivers, finding to their surprise and joy a land of plenty. Over time, they explored the almost empty island, crossed the lakes, clambered across the mountain passes, and examined the fertility of the soil. The first settlers were looking to put down roots, somewhere to begin farming, somewhere to call home. "5,000 years ago, this area of North Mayo was covered in forest, thousands of acres of holly, oak, birch and elm. The ancient farmers felled the trees, dug the soil, and created boundaries with their stony walls. Their tombs, animal shelters, and worn-out axe heads still lie under the Céide fields. Yet the urge to be near water was always strong. "2,000 years ago, for safety, ruling Celtic families built their own artificial islands called crannogs. As well as providing security, the lakes were a source of food, and their animals could graze along the shore. Over 2,000 of these man-made islands are scattered across the lakes of the Irish Midlands. In one, severed heads were found deep in the foundations, perhaps an offering to the gods of the lake. Hundreds of crannogs remain, most of them unexplored. Before any roads existed, rivers were the ancient routeways. They allowed free access to people with new ideas, products and merchandise to penetrate the interior of the island, often from faraway, exotic places. But over time, land routes were developed and the ancient chariot road to the west past Clonmacnoise, here on the banks of the River Shannon. 1,500 years ago, St. Kieran chose this spot to found his monastery. It had a hospital and a famous school, the equal of anything in Europe. But water, one of the forces behind this spectacular development, was also instrumental in its downfall. The Shannon brought the Vikings, who attacked and looted Clonmacnoise again and again. In 1552, the hospital, monastery and school were finally destroyed. In medieval Ireland, business and trade with the known world was by sailing ship, and the first cities grew around the ports. "650 years ago, Waterford was one of the earliest duty-free seaports in the world. Vessels from Spain, Portugal, and from Bordeaux in France with prized cargoes of wine were coming and going on every tide. But in April 1349, a ship arrived and plague-infected rats scuttled ashore. The Black Death began in Ireland. Anybody who touched a body became infected immediately. People believed the end of the world had arrived as the plague ravaged the country, eventually killing 40% of the population in the towns and cities. Ireland's medieval trade collapsed. Yet slowly, over time, life and trade recovered. "200 years later, on the other side of the country, Galway was a prosperous and affluent port. But threatening the vessels sailing in and out of the medieval port were the notorious pirates of Clew Bay. Their leader was the fearless Grace O'Malley, Granuaile, Queen of the O'Malleys. North of Galway is Clew Bay, studded with hundreds of drumlins formed in the Ice Age. They provided an ideal hiding place for Granuaile's wickedly fast pirate galleys, which dashed out to plunder passing ships. On Clare Island, this tower house was built as a summer residence and became Granuaile's headquarters. From here she claimed ownership of the western seas, renting out the rich fisheries and enforcing a toll by the sword on all who sailed through O'Malley waters. Land, she was an astute businesswoman and politician. On water, Grace was an expert sailor and lived an independent life as uncrowned Queen of the Sea. Ireland was once dotted with small kingdoms, and on the north of the island, Dunluce Castle dominated the rugged coastline of County Antrim for over 400 years. The ruling families, the McQuillans, and then the MacDonalds lived in this fortress until one stormy night when the walls cracked and the kitchens and staff fell 40 meters onto the rocks below. And at the time, the politics were dangerous too. In the turbulent 16th century, a storm was coming. Reformation violently divided Europe. Protestant England and Catholic Spain became bitter enemies. In September 1588, the Great Spanish Armada was defeated in the English Channel and fled northwards into the Atlantic. But the Armada was surprised by a hurricane, and for days, damaged ships fought to keep from certain death on the jagged Irish coast. Here at Lacada Point, sailors and young Spanish noblemen spilled into the sea, many dragged down by their heavy gold chains and jewelry. In total, 29 galleons were wrecked along the coast of the island. Thousands perished. Three galleons ran aground here at Strida, where one lucky Spanish captain, Francisco de Cuellar, clambered ashore. Narrowly avoiding capture by English soldiers, he found his way to Loch Melvin and rowed out to the island castle of a friendly chieftain, the Maclancy. De Cuellar spent 3 months here recovering his strength, until the soldiers tracked him down again. Using his military knowledge, he outfought them, but the brave captain had to run once more, this time from Maclancy, who insisted that Seigneur de Cuellar marry his sister. As the medieval period came to an end, Dublin grew beyond the ancient walls surrounding the city to become the main port and capital. And by 1740, it had coffee houses, an independent parliament, a long-established university, law courts, and stock exchange. But like today, the needs and demands of the growing capital were changing the landscape. Ireland's 1,100 kilometres of canals were the liquid highways of the 18th and 19th centuries. They were built to connect Dublin to the north and the west. Construction of the canals was the first major industrial project in Ireland. A simple and efficient engineering wonder which played an important part in the process of change across the island. Diverting water in a different way jolted Ireland's development forward as the hydroelectricity station of Ardnacrusha began to light up the land. Built in 1929, Ardnacrusha added power and confidence to the newly independent Irish state. Before the written word, Before stone or soil, water was the first principle, the very genesis of life itself. For coastal people, the sea is life. Ballycotton once depended wholly on fishing. Today, fish are scarce, and the village must find other ways of making a living. And the ever-vigilant lifeboat is still here, ready to aid those who fall foul of the rocky coastline. The black lighthouse of Ballycotton also remains. Like all Irish lighthouses, it is now unmanned. But although we have radar and global positioning satellites, the ocean can suddenly twitch. Long narrative of this island, water, the rivers, lakes, even the ocean itself has created many different stories. In the past, great coastal cliffs were a physical meeting place between the two worlds of earth and sea. In such places, our ancestors arrived full of fear and hope. They dreamed of finding a home, a place of their own. And they did. Next on the island, the earth. For millennia, the source of our livelihood and spirituality. For in the past, the earth was seen as our mother. The story of Ireland has always been the story of land. Yet over time, our relationship with the earth has changed. Thousands of years ago, people thought differently about the earth. To our pagan ancestors, the earth, the very soil, had life, and it was female in form and nature. On the Cork-Kerry border, these twin mountains, the Paps, were the breasts of Anu, goddess of Munster. To early people, life had an obvious principle. Every young creature, human and animal, had a mother, and nature herself, the provider of all, must be female, woman. Long before the written word, the ancient stories of Irish mythology were imprinted on the landscape. The celebrated Queen Maeve, believed to lie within the stone cairn on Knocknarea, was the dynamic character of the Táin Bó Cúailnge, translated from Gaelic as the cattle raid of Cooley, the oldest epic tale in Western Europe. Maeve's legendary tomb has never been opened. Not far away in the Brickleave Mountains is Carrowkeel. Here, prehistoric farming families built 14 passage tombs overlooking their Stone Age village. They placed their dead in great stone bellies, returning them to the source of life, Mother Earth. This was the entrance to the other world of the Stone Age. The Hill of Tara had a ritual and strategic importance for thousands of years. This ceremonial avenue points to a mound which contained the body of a princess buried 4,000 years ago. She wore a rare necklace of blue faience beads from the Eastern Mediterranean, the other side of the known world. The tomb was a focal point for ritual and magic, conducted by a sacred elite, the Druids. One famous Kerry Druid lived in the rugged Sleevemish Mountains. His name was Corey MacDara, and legends say he kept an extraordinary flying machine. Stories told of his machine able to carry him through the air, but kept hidden behind the stone walls of Caherconry, the fortress that stuck out into the sky. 2,000 years ago, velvety grass fed the cattle herds. In the Iron Age, cattle were the main source of wealth. As the herds grew, so did the population, and ring forts were enclosed family farmsteads, and sometimes centres of territorial power. The chieftains lived in a multi-banked, high-status ring fort with servants and animals clustered outside. People became organised into larger groups, Celtic Ireland developed a complex society. Dún Álainne is the largest ritual site in Leinster, surrounded by a massive earthen bank and deep ditch. On top of the hill, Celtic people built a huge stadium made of oak. 2,000 years ago, hundreds of spectators sat high in the great circular arena, and archaeological excavations found broken swords and shattered arm bracelets, telling of combat between gladiators or bullfights, man against beast. The Irish saw their own spirit move within the land, but others saw only profit. For thousands of years, the island had provided for its people. But this changed when old Gaelic Ireland ran into organised and ruthless Elizabethan England, beginning 100 years of traumatic change. Munster's coastal waters, crowded with shellfish, brought adventurers, the name given to English businessmen who came to rent the rich oyster beds of Cork and the mussel beds of Youghal. Behind the coastline lay thriving and prosperous Munster, with fertile pasture, great swathes of woodland, good road and river access. Its wealth beckoned to these sharp and opportunistic men. In the late 16th century, one of these men, Walter Raleigh, came to Youghal to rent the fisheries. He lived here in Myrtle Grove, planting the first potatoes in Europe and looking for ways to become rich. Raleigh knew that England's forests had been decimated by the insatiable demand for timber. He grabbed 40,000 acres between Youghal and Lismore. Within a decade, the great beech woods of the Blackwater Valley had been stripped. This destruction of the ancient forests was repeated across the island until the woods were gone. In 1602, Walter Raleigh sold Lismore Castle to Richard Boyle, who continued the exploitation of Munster's woodland. He rebuilt and extended the castle from the proceeds. This ruthless exploitation continued until the Irish were dispossessed of the most important thing in their lives: the land. As for Walter Raleigh, he was beheaded. But the potato seed he brought from Peru flourished in Irish soil. By the 1840s, the lumper potato was the basic diet of millions of Irish. The potato crop failed 3 years in succession, causing catastrophe: the famine. One million died, another million emigrated. Like skeletal bones on the landscape, these potato beds still hold the memory of the final rotten crop. Yet the land recovered, as did the people. Farmers on this island are among the longest established communities in Europe. Over centuries, they shared the social connections of a rural life. In the last 30 years, society in Ireland has changed fundamentally, and farming in particular is dramatically different to the way it was. Although the land continues to be an essential part of Ireland's economy and identity, its importance has changed. As recently as the 1980s, agriculture was the dominant business of the island. The production of milk, butter and cheese alone sustained 60,000 farming families. Today, as farms get bigger, less than half that number of dairy farmers remain on the land. Depopulation of rural areas has become the pattern of change across Ireland. Now much of what we eat comes from cultivation on a factory scale. Artificial growing techniques, computer-controlled climates, and the manipulation of nature has resulted in massive increases in yield. The appetites of modern society now exceed what the land and the Irish climate can produce. The landscape of the island is constantly evolving, and bogs are the result of climatic change thousands of years ago. And how we harvest turf has changed also. Bogs cover 1/6 of the island. And 10,000 years ago, these brown deserts of the Irish Midlands were a shallow lagoon, a vast marshy lake where giant elk roamed. Today, bogs are a multi-purpose resource, providing rich soil for the suburban gardener, fuel for home fires, and electricity for the island. Bogs are a legacy from the past, helping us move into the future. In 21st century Ireland, the majority now live in urban areas. 90% of all employed work in industry and services. As we have moved from agriculture to a modern services and industry-based economy, the earth and the landscape took on a new meaning. In the 19th century, people living in European suburbs and cities began to appreciate the countryside as something beautiful in itself, and they began to travel to Ireland to see its rugged wild beauty. By 1900, a new industry was firmly established: tourism. Today, tourism is of major value to the island, and every year, up to 1 million people visit Killarney and its magnificent national park. And every year, 200,000 people visit the royal tombs of the Boyne Valley and marvel at their ancient complexity. Before the pyramids, our pagan ancestors built these mysterious earthen mounds to represent who they were and what they believed. These were people who worshipped the land and the sacred power of nature. In the modern world, it's easy to forget what first stirred our culture and imagination. Thousands of years ago, Mother Earth was worshipped as the source of life itself. But times changed. Christianity brought a new God. He was male. Next on the island, powerful statements in stone. Almost 2 billion years ago, the great geological drama that created the Irish landscape began. And when the first people came to the island, they believed that high places were homes to the gods. Close to the heavens, mountains were stony places of pilgrimage. Before the written word, stone was a statement of power and strength. High above the Donegal-Derry border, a warrior dynasty built the Grianán, or Sun Palace, as their royal seat of power. From within its massive 6-meter-high stone walls, they controlled their northern lands. 2,000 years ago, a series of limestone forts were built along the west coast of Ireland, the edge of the known world. Little is known about the builders of the fortresses on the Aran Islands. Perhaps Celts from Britannia or Gaul, or exiles driven from the mainland of Ireland, made their final stand on this edge. All this, however, is speculation. Exactly why these fortresses were built remains a mystery. But stone was not just used for defense. The Dingle Peninsula has one of the richest densities of archaeological monuments in Europe. Stone beehives of holy men, remote promontory forts, and a spider's web of stone walls cover the landscape with a complex, fragile record. 6,000 years of human activity. Dingle reveals itself as a landscape of the ancient world. Stone protects, and it endures, even after death. Hidden within the limestone hills of southeast Limerick is the enchanted Loch Gur. Over 30 ancient monuments surround the shores. On the hill of Carrigalia, people lived in rectangular timber houses inside these cashels, or stone forts. Close to the lake, the community built their ritual site. Grange Stone Circle, the largest of the mysterious stone circles in Ireland. Aligned with the midsummer sunrise, the biggest stone, Black Crumb, was worshipped as their idol. And these enigmatic stone circles can be found all over the island. In County Tyrone, a family cutting turf in the summer of 1945 stumbled across an extensive pagan ritual site buried for 4,000 years. As the peat was cut away, 7 stone circles, numerous burial cairns and stone alignments facing the rising sun were gradually revealed. In Ireland, ancient pagan beliefs had lasted more than 3,000 years. But a new faith arrived. Within 200 years, it had become the religion of the land. Limestone expressed the exterior structures of Christianity. The new shapes of tower, cloister and priory began to appear in the landscape. Augustinian monks from Cornwall founded the Priory of Kells around 1193. It grew into an important settlement with a school and monastery within its high stone walls. The community grew cereals on their land, ground flour for bread, and brewed their own beer. Surrounding the largest monastic enclosure in Ireland, 6 towers provided lodgings for the monks, and the high walls gave their animals protection from wolves and outlaws. Rising from the plains of Tipperary is one of the most important collections of medieval buildings on the island. The Rock of Cashel is a testament to the wealth and taste of Munster's kings and bishops and the talent and skill of Irish stonemasons. 800 years ago, its complex design was startling, and with its cathedral, round tower and archbishop's palace, Cashel became an architectural triumph of Christianity. In contrast, early Christian monks believed the simple existence of the hermit was the way to God. They lived and worshipped 200 meters above the heaving Atlantic on this isolated and jagged mass of slate. some of this stone is almost 2 billion years old. And during that vast stretch of time, Ireland experienced dramatic geological changes. It was submerged beneath the sea, had mountain ranges of Himalayan proportions, and experienced earthquakes and volcanoes. In the Irish countryside, castles are the commonest kind of stone antiquity. Over 3,000 of them were built. Castles were symbols of territorial power and a living space for the family, a combination of function, design, and status. In medieval Ireland, some chieftains built large fortresses in the belief that stone was enough to protect them. In the 16th century, the wealthy O'Flahertys used the finest stonemasons to create this 5-story tower with a banqueting hall that seated 100. But this period of relative independence was shattered by the intrusion of Elizabethan England, determined to rule the island. Stone could not withstand gunpowder, and within 100 years, ruthless politics and greed had dispossessed the old nobility of Ireland. Their land and their castles were taken. By 1700, new landowners had replaced the exiled Gaelic nobility. Using their immense wealth, they built the finest houses, like here at Selbridge. Over time, some new arrivals identified with Ireland and demanded independence for the country they had become part of. Frederick Hervey, Bishop of Derry, entertained the new aristocracy in the stylish mansion he built for himself in the 1770s. Excluded by law from the wealth and prosperity of the 18th century, the old Gaelic nation became submerged many becoming tenant farmers. In the west of Ireland, generations of small farmers cleared the land and created these stone walls without mortar or cement. Over centuries, 830,000 kilometres of walls were built, surviving frost and ice, famine and emigration. This flinty landscape held the Gaelic-speaking communities together. Ancient customs and language survived on the rocky farms. Ignored by the British Empire, it was here that the Irish language remained alive. Just over 100 years ago, in pre-independence Ireland, the West became the inspiration for an Irish literary revival based in Dublin. In the capital, the rediscovery of Irish language and folklore joined the growing sense of national identity and the desire for self-rule. The city became the hub of a secret revolutionary movement organizing and arming for independence. Dozens of buildings across the capital were destroyed in the 1916 Rising, an explosion beginning the separation of the island from the British Empire. The symbols of that long-established power remain across the island. After a difficult conflict, independence was achieved for most of the island. Cork became the second city, and cultural changes followed. Ancient Gaelic names were revived as Cove replaced Queenstown, and in Dublin, Kingstown became Dunleera. Despite the political changes outside the cities, the majority continued to farm. People lived in a countryside relatively unchanged for centuries. In the Burren, time has stood still. Taking its name from the Gaelic for stony countryside, the Burren covers 500 square kilometres of County Clare, exposing the bare bones of Ireland's rocky skeleton. The Burren is an archaeological wonder. Its surface interleaved with road and wall, human division and boundary. The marks and scratches of our existence remaining in stone. Today, as our way of life rapidly changes, so too does the landscape. So we must ask ourselves, in the future, what will the landscape of the island look like? Today, Ireland looks very different. Progress is transforming the landscape of the island. Society has also undergone dramatic change. We now belong to the great machine of mass culture where speed and disposability are valued most of all, and where the environment is constantly under threat. In 21st century Ireland, who we have become and where we're going often seems unclear. We have yet to address many questions, including what role will our history, our culture, and the environment have in the future? In 21st century Ireland, a short generation of progress has all but destroyed our ancient connection to the island. We no longer worship water, earth, or stone. We have changed. And in doing so, what have we lost? Are we now just another product of mass-produced culture where ancient roots are forgotten? Or does a connection to the island still lie deep within us, waiting to be rediscovered?